Once, long ago, in a giant stone cottage on a windy cliff by the Irish Sea, there lived a clever giantess, Oonagh McCool, and her husband, Finn McCool. Sure, you've heard of the great and glorious Finn McCool, tall as a tree and strong as a stone. But big and mighty as Finn was, Oonagh was twice as daring and dauntless. In fact, without his wife, Oonagh McCool, the awesomest giantess that ever lived, there'd hardly be much of a Finn McCool left to speak of. The story goes that one day Oonagh said to Finn, "Won't you finally fix us a new well today? The wind's been blowing through that door day and night, and it's time I had a nice hot bath." So, wanting to make Oonagh happy, Finn went off to the rocky hills and got started. But, like any other good giant, he'd not tossed more than a few boulders when he started wondering if he shouldn't be doing something just a wee bit more giantly, like clobbering ogres or wrestling some other hellions instead of dredging up stones just to fetch some bath water. So he wandered to the shore to see if there weren't any sea monsters that needed a good beating or two, when lo and behold, who should be on the other side of the Irish Sea but a big stropping giant named Benandonner, thinking the very same thing. Benandonner was a big, mean, angry giant who liked nothing more than pummeling other giants and had been waiting for the day he could fight Finn McCool. Soon as he spied Finn over the Irish Sea, he shouted out, "I've given every giant in this land a good sound beating, and I'll serve you the same sauce too. That's if you're even worth the pickle and can call yourself a giant. Lucky for you, this sea here's keeping us apart." Now, Benandonner was a colossal, thundering mountain of a giant. In fact, he was the biggest giant that all of giant country had ever seen. But all the way across the sea, he only looked like an angry, stumping little bitty of a thing to Finn. So Finn shouted back, "Is that so? You call yourself a giant? I'll show you who's a giant." And with his bare hands, he started tearing out big hunking pieces of rock from the cliffs and lobbing them out into the water. They landed with huge thunking splashes all the way across until the two Goliaths found themselves across a giant causeway. "Well, now you've no excuse," roared Finn. And now Benandonner didn't. So he picked up the giant fir tree he used as a spear and with a colossal leap started thumping across the causeway. Boom, boom, boom. With each giant step, Finn felt the earth rumble beneath his feet and heard the cliffs around him start to crumble and crack. As Benandonner boomed closer and closer, Finn saw him get bigger and bigger. At last, Finn McCool thought to himself, "Maybe that Benandonner is a wee bit bigger than I thought." So Finn McCool did what any sensible giant in his gigantic shoes would do. He ran straight home to his wife, Oonagh, and confessed, "Well, it seems I've picked a fight with an angry giant, and maybe, just this once, I might have bitten off a wee bit more than I can chew." Now, Oonagh McCool could be as cool and calm as Finn could be foolish and flustered. When she saw Benandonner clumping up the hill, she wasted no time and pushed her husband straight into the bathtub and tossed over a bedsheet. Warning him to keep shut and still, she hurried and pounded out 3 loaves of cake and shoved them in the oven just as Benandonner thumped his fist on the door. Finn trembled like a baby in the bathtub as Oonagh opened the door and Benandonner roared, "Where's that puny giant Finn McCool? I've come to beat him up into a bloody gruel." Oonagh smiled politely. "Sure, if you say so. Only he's just gone to pick a fight with another giant. But he'll be happy to fight you as soon as he's back. Why don't you come in for a cuppa and wait?" Benandonner gave a thundering snort. "All right, but just 1 cup, and I'll still be beating your husband to a bloody pulp when he gets back." Crouching down to step through the door, Benandonner barely got his toe over the threshold when Oonagh clapped her hands together and said, "Heavens to Murgatroyd! I just realised I'm plumb out of fresh water. Would you do me a courtesy and fetch me a fresh pail? The well's just underneath that mountain over there, and I do like a cup with fresh spring water." Seeing as how Oonagh had asked so politely, Benandonner couldn't see a way to refuse, so went grumbling over to the mountain to fetch the water. Grappling his big hairy palms onto the rocky mountain, Benandonner heaved and hoed until half the hill came off in his hands, revealing a cool, fresh spring of water underneath. It was no easy task, even for the gigantic Benandonner. Dabbing away at his brow with the back of his hairy wrist, he thought to himself, "Maybe this Finn McCool's bigger than I thought, if this is where he comes for a drink of water. I better warm myself up for a good fight." So, Benandonner lugged the giant pail of water all the way back to Oonagh, then grumbled, "There you go now, Mrs. McCool. Now, for that cup of tea." "Of course. I'll just put the kettle on. In the meantime, would you do me a civility and turn the house around first? Finn usually gives it a quick turn right about now, as I do like a bit of sun with my afternoon tea. Plus, it keeps the evening winds from coming through that door." Seeing as how Oonagh had asked so politely once again, Benandonner couldn't refuse and stumped round to the side of the house. Bending his big hairy knees, Benandonner wrapped his big hairy arms around the whole house and heaved and hoed and huffed and puffed until finally, with a great big grunt, he lifted the stone cottage up in the air, gave it a good turn around, and then dropped it back down again with a big sodding thump. Now he was really mopping the sweat off his big hairy brow and thought to himself, "This Finn McCool might be a wee bit stronger than I thought, if this be one of his daily chores." Tired now and out of breath, Benandonner stumped inside the cottage and bellowed, "There you go now, Mrs. McCool. Now, about that cup." "Of course. Now you sit right down. Why don't you Finn's cup for now, seeing as you've been such a great help?" said Oonagh, as she dropped a big iron cooking pot right in front of him. As Oonagh sloshed in the hot brew, Benandonner winced and wondered at the size of the giant who took such an enormous cup. Desperate for some refreshment after an afternoon's hard labour, Benandonner waved the thought away and grabbed the pot up with both his hands. But the brew barely made it to his lips when Oonagh clapped her hands together again and piped, "Now, where are my manners? Here you are with a nice big cup of tea, but no cake to go with it. Well, we can't have that now, can we?" Quick as a flash, Oonagh pried the pot back out of Benandonner's hands and replaced it instead with a loaf of cake as big as a bus, but not before she slyly stuck an iron griddle plum inside. Not having had a bite to eat all day, nor a moment's rest, Benandonner was by now more than just a bit peckish. With a greedy grin, he clutched up the delicious-smelling cake and took a big, giant bite. Crack! "Blood and fury!" shouted Benandonner as two of his giant teeth fell out onto his lap. "What kind of cake is this?" "Oh, silly me. I forgot to mention, Finn does like his cake a bit on the crisp side. I don't like it too much myself, but he doesn't seem to mind, and neither does the baby." "Baby?" croaked Benandonner, as another tooth fell from his lips. "Why, yes, a baby." "Oh, have you not seen one before?" "Well, seeing as how you've been such a great help to me this afternoon and the most pleasurable guest, I'll let you have a look." Bringing Benandonner over on his tippy toes, Oonagh pulled back the shower curtain around the bathtub and revealed none other than Finn McCool wearing bloomers for a bonnet and sucking on his thumb like a baby in a cradle. "He's only a wee little one, but he's already got his papa's teeth. Now don't you?" beamed Oonagh as she threw another loaf of cake into the tub. Popping his thumb out of his mouth, Finn grabbed up the cake with a big toothy grin and gobbled it up. One look at the big giant baby and Benandonner's colossal knees began to quake as he thought to himself, "If this big hairy thing is Finn McCool's baby,
then maybe Finn McCool isn't a giant I want to meet.
Without another word, Benandonner turned round as quick as lightning and shot out the door. Before you could say, Oonagh McCool, he'd run all the way back down the hill and over the Irish Sea, tearing up the causeway behind him as he fled, so he'd never have to face the likes of Finn McCool again. When Benandonner was halfway gone, Finn jumped out of the bathtub and stormed after him. "And don't you come back now," he shouted, just to make sure he knew what was what. When the two giants were out of each other's sights for good, Finn McCool hurried back home and poured his wife a nice hot bath. Afterwards, Oonagh McCool finally sat down with her husband to a well-earned cup of tea and a spot of sun in the gentle Irish breeze.